As part of the UCC heritage, the Just Peace movement began in the early 80s, in hopes that as a denomination we might move the world to embrace a call beyond war. In the 1983 pronouncement, it was defined as the interrelation of friendship, justice, and common security from violence, a call that resonates from the Gospels, from the stories that Jesus tells his community that ask them individually and collectively to participate in the faithful action of covenant and shalom, themes that resonate deep within the Hebrew tradition, the balm of Gilead. As a call for the denomination, Just Peace offers a holistic view of working at the intersection of peace and justice, of acknowledging the connections between violence and systematic issues like environmental degradation, racism, economic disparity, homophobia, a loss of civil and human rights. As a church, it calls individual churches, individuals in those churches, and all of our families to dig into how we live and to see how we are affected by the cultures of violence that surround us and affect us. And while it is a critical understanding of the church, it can be a harder sell than the O&A designation, in part because it asks us to live more fully into the universal love of God than even O&A churches sometimes are ready to do. How can you participate in a conversation when that conversation is at the tip of a weapon? This is the question of the Just Peace movement, and a question for the church on this Just Peace Sunday. Into an unjust world, into a world troubled and troubling, Jesus speaks a parable. A story of some convoluted ways to truth, but ones that don't feel dissimilar from our own world. A man is fired, and in retaliation, he seeks a way to provide a soft landing for his fall, and so turns his owner's business to his benefit. And yet into this messy situation full of deceit, Jesus shows that God is working through it all, that dishonesty might be a reality of the world, but that forgiveness is also a reality of this world. Jesus tells the parable of this shrewd manager, or dishonest manager in some versions, to the disciples to help them build peaceful relationships with others near and far. As the story focuses on God's generosity being greater than the earthly possessions we hold, we can see God as the loaner of money, the Pharisees as the religious leaders who are the lovers of money, along with the manager and the rich man who example a way of peace and justice through friendship. In this parable, Jesus uses these typical relationships to show us how godly people can spread friendships among nations. Jesus speaks of the good news that heals us from worldly greed and gives us a hope for a better tomorrow. We do not expect the business owner to commend this betrayal, right? And yet, he does. He praised the debt forgiveness, given in the hopes of favor among the debtors. The unintended consequence of the debt forgiveness was a benefit rather than a loss for that boss, because by ensuring that all would be able to actually pay their debts, the boss does actually get to recoup some of those debts. It seems counterintuitive that forgiveness would lead to profit, but it is certainly true. The parable asks us to break through the walls that divide us and to do so in the service of others. Jesus helps us to come up with solutions that bring us together instead of tearing us apart. A call for just peace in our lives, a call for togetherness the seeking of alternative solutions than the ways of the world that seem so much easier. Jesus is teaching the disciples, Jesus is teaching us to look at our situations, to be prepared to make decisions, to come up with strategies, and to do what is needed, even when it is unexpected. It isn't an invitation to use dishonest wealth to exploit others, but to understand the wealth of the world, to share this human experience with others, to make friends. Friendship, however, must be based on some reciprocal, equal relationships. If we were to follow those footsteps, it would lead us, as it led the manager, to release debts. In so doing, we will find that our forgiveness enriches the debtor, but also establishes a new kind of mutuality. Seeking mutuality is also about adjusting to our power relationships. When we seek justice in the world, when we seek to release debt, or need to advocate for others' debts to be forgiven, it must be with an understanding that the power that wealth holds in our lives and the other kinds of power that we create too. Personal favor, as the manager sought in a less honest way, is on level with financial gain, and neither is a neutral power. It is used either for God's purposes that are just or for other purposes that are unjust. This is what this parable tells us. What we do with the wealth, with the power that we have, however great or small, is of enormous importance. So that whatever we do with our lives will either be as a way to make way for peace or to engage in the powers of death. We are either the servants of God or the servants of money, ever seeking more. Our opening meditation this morning spoke of the need for a breakthrough, using the image of a single flower breaking through the colorless gray of pavement. You can find it online on the UCC website. I suggest you do. There's, in fact, an entire video from General Minister John Dorhauer. But it's asking for us to see that breakthrough as the example of Jesus in the good news of the story. In this story, Jesus shows us that the good news of God's loving power will transform us from the inside out. And it is a power that we have accessible to us just as it is accessible to God. That releasing debts is indicative of what happens when the reign of God emerges among us. When we release debts, we participate in a disruptive power of God. We make time for others, and we look for ways that old hierarchies could be overturned, new friendships and relationships established, rather than what we have been told is right. Speaking from the hope in the gospel that God's peace is a gift promised to us all, just peace, a just peace life offers a prophetic way of living into God's vision, so that we can move beyond what we see around us and look for what comes next. The shared hope that peace is possible, that God's realm is already among us. And that would certainly be a breakthrough. To push this point home, the verse that follows today's reading says, the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all this and they ridiculed Jesus. So Jesus said to them, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your hearts. God knows our hearts too. God knows all of humanity's hearts and is calling us to be better, to make space for peace, for an upending of the world in which we live, so that we might live wholeheartedly in God's realm of compassion, of peace, of justice, of a friendship founded on difference. The Reverend Dr. Demonthea Niles of Eden has written a prayer for this week. Some wonderful words that encapsulate this breakthrough, this need for breakthrough within our own hearts. So hear this prayer. Holy Architect of Peace, help us to participate in your vision of peace, a vision that sees the value of all, that listens to all the parts of the cosmos in all of its diverse abundance, but with a particular care for the weakest and the most easily silenced. Help us to be champions for the weak and contesters of the voices that silence, so that creatures you have loved into being might be part of the ebb and flow of the dynamic conversation that makes your peace. May we live into this vision of peace today, with the tools among us in our world to create God's place here in our community. Amen.